We have Sky Bergman here. As you've heard, we just discovered that we grew up in the same town and went to the same high school, and she was in my sister's class.
Amazing.
This is a small world connection that I've never had. This is a So aside from growing up in Hollywood, Florida, and going to Nova High School, Sky has accomplished so much in her life. She's an award-winning photographer. She created this documentary. If you watched it, you heard, to document what her grandmother has taught her or the lessons her grandmother has learned over life. Her fine artwork is included in permanent collections at the LA County Museum of Art, which my sister-in-law loves that museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Her commercial work has appeared on book covers for Random House and Farrar, Straus and Giroux. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Inc.
Close enough.
My pronunciations are horrible. As well as magazine spreads in Smithsonian, Arthur Fromer's Budget Travel, Reader's Digest, and Archaeology Odyssey. Now she's a professor of photography and video at Cal Poly State in San Luis Obispo. So we are very excited to have her. I hope you watch this movie. If you have not, you have a few more days to watch it. It is so lovely and inspiring, and everybody should watch it.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. What an amazing introduction there, Rachel. That was amazing. So I'm so excited to be here, and even more excited that we have this connection of having gone to the same high school. I think that's incredible. Yeah, but thank you all for being here. And like Rachel said, if you didn't watch the film, you'll get another couple of days. And if you did watch it and you were so inspired, you can share it with somebody else and maybe give them a little lift as well. But I don't know if you want me to talk about kind of the inspiration for the film or what. Yeah,
yes.
Sure. So, and please, anyone that has any questions, we're such a small group, just unmute yourself or chat in the chat window, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that come up. But I made this film, as Rachel said, really out of a love of my grandmother. And when she was approaching 100, I was approaching 50. And I was thinking about what is the rest of my life going to look like, and who are the role models that I want out there, because I certainly want somebody that's positive. And my grandmother was the epitome of that. She had one rule of life, which was just to be kind. And I have tried to live my life that way, but man, she was just an amazing role model. And as you saw in the film, those of you who saw the film, I filmed her working out on her bicycle when she was getting ready to turn 100. And just a throwaway comment, I asked her for some words of wisdom. And she said things like, be kind and live life to the limits. And I came back from that trip and I just thought, wow, I want to find other people out there that are as much an inspiration as my grandmother is to me. And so I sent an email blast out to all my friends, family, and alum that I've taught over the years I've been here at the university. And I just said, if you have somebody in your life that's like my grandmother, please nominate them for this project. And the wonderful thing was I was just inundated by incredible nominations, just wonderful people all over the country. And I didn't know I was going to be doing a film. I thought I was going to do this little web series, but it ended up being a feature-length film that has gone out there in the world, and now it's going to be on PBS in May. So it's pretty spectacular. And my newest passion is really connecting generations and doing intergenerational projects using the film as a catalyst. So we've been showing the film to high schools and colleges, and we have a learning module where they can pair up with elders, and the students can, and they use the questions that I formulated from the film, and they get to meet each other. And my belief is that we can always combat isms if we meet the person that's the other and we get to know them. And when you know somebody one-on-one, it's a little bit harder to have a stereotype of that particular group. And so we try and have this intergenerational connection back and forth. And it's really been super successful. So that's kind of the newest thing that I'm working on. And that came out of reading something when I was doing the research for my film, which was that I read in the Huffington Post that the last 100 years is the first time in human history that we've looked to anyone other than our elders for advice. And I really feel the world is suffering as a result. And so the more that I can do to connect the generations, I think the better off we will all be. And so that's kind of a little background on why I did the film and how I did the film and what I'm doing now, I guess.
So I'm curious how you found all these wonderful people who you included in the film.
Yeah, so I sent an email blast out and said, this is the project that I'm working on. And I think that once I realized I was going to do a film, because I just thought it was going to be maybe a web series or something, but I was interviewing Marianne Wolf, who's a woman, those of you that haven't seen the film, she came over on the very first Kindertransport from Vienna, Austria during World War II, where the Quakers in the UK were trying to rescue as many children as they could, and they rescued 10,000 children. And I knew that about her, but I really had only met her once before. You would go over and have coffee or tea with the people that I was going to interview with, just the day before I would do it, and then come over with my cameras the next day. So, we had talked about that. But what I didn't realize was when I did the interview with her, she pulled out that cardboard number that she wore around her neck at the age of 8 years old. And I still get chills every time I think about that moment, because I'm Jewish, but I didn't know anything about the Kindertransport. I mean, I don't know, I thought I knew a lot about what happened in the Holocaust, but that part of the puzzle I hadn't really heard about. And the fact that she had saved that and it left such an indelible mark on her life, it was at that moment that I realized this is bigger than a web series, that I really need to do a film. And why I thought I could do that, since I'd never done a film before, but I just knew I had to get this out there in a film. And I knew it had started as this project where I was collecting the wisdom of elders, but it was also about collecting their stories and making sure that they were heard before those stories were lost. And so once I kind of realized that, I did that initial call, but then I also really sought out certain stories. Like I felt it was very important to talk about the story of the Japanese internment during World War II. And so I sought somebody out specifically who, I could tell that story. And Susie is amazing. She's still alive. She just celebrated her 101st birthday last week.
Wow.
So in the film, she says she wants to make it to 100, and she did that and more. And she's amazing. But she's an incredible storyteller and also one of the most positive people that I know. But I really felt like that it was so important to tell the story of what happened in our own country, because it's very easy to say, oh, all those things happened over there in another country, but much more difficult to look inward. So there was a point at which I was very specifically seeking out stories. But in the beginning, it just started as a call for entries, really, basically. Yeah.
So were you calling friends of friends, or like reaching out?
Yeah, I mean, I reached out to everyone, and then I have to say that my partner in life, he is a podiatrist, or was. He retired at the beginning of this pandemic. And he also, he treated a lot of older patients, and he had some amazing people like Lucky Louie, who is, I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but he was my favorite. And he recently passed away, which is a great loss to me, because I would, even during the pandemic, I would go over to his house and stand outside his doorway with a mask on while he was making his mozzarellas every morning for his daughter's deli. He did that up until a week before he passed away. He was 97. And, so he also helped clue me into some people. And then I think once the word got out as to what I was doing, people started sending, really interesting people my way. And I would venture to say that everyone has an amazing story to tell, but we don't take the time to listen in the way that we should. We're so busy on our phones and everything else, and we get so distracted. And what a gift that I had, that I was able to take 4 years to just listen to people's stories. And one of the things that we did on the website, because I realized I had to stop interviewing people or I would never get a film done, is that we created a place on the website where people can share their stories. So if you have an amazing story, or somebody that has a story, you can go to the website and actually share your story or the story of a loved one, or just use those questions to, like, one of the biggest regrets that people had when I asked them about the regrets was not asking somebody a question who had passed away. And so I would say, make sure you ask those questions, or if you are, an elder, maybe just answer some of those questions before your kids or grandkids even ask, and write them down somewhere, because they I'm sure are curious, and they just might not know how to ask the right questions.
Or what questions to ask.
Right. And that was, that's been one of the successes of our intergenerational projects, is that we give the students and the elders a list of questions and prompts, and that just gets the conversation started. Because I think it's really the hardest thing if you're doing an interview with somebody is just to say, okay, tell me about yourself. That's so wide open-ended that, and also you don't want to have yes or no questions, because people will just say yes or no and the conversation stops there. So I spent a lot of time working with other professors at the university here, formulating questions that would be open-ended enough that people would answer and could expand on, and you could ask follow-up questions. So yeah, it's a nice starting point for families to use that.
One thing that struck me when I was rewatching the film was I wonder, do these people who you were talking with, did they know how remarkable they were? Like,
No.
Because
No.
each one had such remarkable experiences or attitudes towards life and just this positive outlook towards life. And I wonder if they recognized that they were exceptional in any way for that positive outlook.
No, I don't think they thought they were exceptional at all. In fact, I think they were kind of floored when the film came out here in theaters and they would be recognized in places. That was kind of like, whoa, overwhelming, because people really felt like they knew them. And they would just say, wow, you're so amazing. And they no, totally humbled, not at all thinking that they are incredible people. But, you know, I think that one of the things that I really was looking for in everyone that I interviewed, and so I wasn't doing a social science, project. I really was looking for role models that I could have in my life. So I was looking for those positive people. And I think one of the questions that people often ask is, well, what did they all have in common? Why were they all so positive? And I think that that's good, because we all want to know how can we be positive? And I think the commonalities that they all had were, one is that we all need a sense of purpose in life. And it doesn't matter what age you are, everyone needs to feel like we have a sense of purpose. And I think the hardest thing for many people when they retire is they lose that sense of purpose. And I think in all of the people that I interviewed, they all had a sense of purpose, whether it was Lucky Louie making his mozzarellas every morning for his daughter's deli, or, Rose Albano Ballestero, who still teaches ESL now on Zoom every morning. Whatever it is, there's that sense of purpose. And I think the other thing is that they all have a good sense of community, and it doesn't necessarily have to be family. It could be friends. I mean, in Lou's case, he had 9 kids and I don't know how many grandkids and great grandkids. So his community really were mostly his family. But in the case of like Marion and Paul Wolf, although they have an amazing family, just as an example, Marion turned 90 recently, and her husband, who's also 90, Paul, figured out how to have a Zoom surprise birthday party for her. So, they still they remain adaptable, but they also like keeping that sense of community, even in this time of a pandemic where it's a little harder to do that. That's still really vitally important. And then I think, the third thing is that they all, we were talking about this before the call a little bit. They all know how to shift their attitude to make it a positive attitude, no matter what's happening in the world at that moment. And I think, humor goes a long way. Marion talks a lot about humor being very important and helping her get through the tough times. But I also, reminded of something that Evie Justison said in the film, which is that there are many times in your life where you can't control the things that are happening around you. I mean, right now is a perfect example with the pandemic, but you can control the attitude that you have about what's surrounding that. So your attitude goes a long way in terms of how you get through life. And I think that all the people in the film, they went through some terrible times, tragedies, and a lot of things that aren't even in the film. And yet they still were able to turn that around and reflect back on that in a positive way. And I think that's the important element.
Yeah, I have found that is such a key thing to success in retirement, is to find a purpose, to volunteer. Like Mary is a volunteer in our Alzheimer's program here at the JCC. And Hazel works with that as well and does a lot of stuff with our senior community. Marcia helps. Sometimes she comes in and cooks for that. And Tiffany's still young, but she just moved to New Orleans and is getting involved here. And having that sense of purpose really I think that is the key to success in retirement. Otherwise, if you lounge around at home, it's a death sentence. You really have to get out in the community and do things that are fulfilling, that you feel like you're helping people and giving back and getting involved. And you learn so much when you interact with people.
Absolutely.
My,
Absolutely. I mean, yeah.
my grandfather lived with us when I was growing up in Hollywood, after my grandmother died. And although he didn't go out and socialize that much, my parents always brought it into the house. He had a big family and always had his friends and family over for big meals. But his purpose was he gardened. He took care of the garden. He gardened away everything, and my father would have to bring in truckloads of fill to resod the house, to put more fill on the house, and because he would just throw out all the dirt along with all the weeds and all half the plants. But my father just kept replanting everything because that was his purpose. He had a goal every day. He had to fill up 1 barrel or 2 barrels or whatever it was, and then pay off the garbage men because the barrels were too heavy for them to lift. And but that was his purpose, and he stayed so healthy from that. I think that that's why we try to have this active program here at the JCC where we just have stimulating conversations and speakers come in, and it really gives people a purpose to continue learning. I think that that's also critical, whether you're doing it through your artwork or through whatever it is. I think that those issues just keep the mind and the body healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one of the people that didn't make it into the film that I interviewed, he said something very important, which was he was this high-powered VP for some insurance company or something. And he said he worked all these years and he had all these parties. The last year he was working, the most depressing day in his life was the day after he retired, because he woke up with no sense of what to do and no sense of purpose. And that he said, because that was in relation to one of the questions I asked is, what advice would you give younger people? And he would say, plan for your retirement. Make sure you know what you're going to do when you retire. Have a goal for yourself. Set something up so that, they say it's your golden years, but if you don't have anything planned, like travel only goes so far. I mean, now we can't even travel. So, how do you set yourself up with some sense of purpose and intent? And giving back and volunteering is definitely one of those ways. And I think just finding your passion and your sense of purpose at any age is really important. But I think especially when we retire, because we have more time, and sometimes having more time can lead to more depression. You have more time to think about it. You have more time. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
My father has taken up furniture building and woodworking in his retirement, and he's created some amazing stuff. And he went from building huge pieces of furniture, which he had never done before, to now he's doing these small sculptures. And he gets up and he plays his tennis in the morning, because that's what you do in Florida, and then comes back and he is busy most of the day with his woodworking.
That's great. That's
great. I think all those things are important. And I love the diversity of people that you had in the film. You had Lucky Louie, who made mozzarella after being a doctor, and you have, I forgot her name, the woman who's the artist, that wonderful, well, you have a couple of artists.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also love the fact that they discussed what it was like to be in a second relationship, or being, to have had that first relationship, to have lost someone, and to be able to move on and find happiness again, and to accept that in your life, and to give yourself permission to be happy again and have this second life in your retirement if you've lost a loved one. To give yourself that permission, I think, is also a beautiful lesson to hear for many people who do find themselves either to have lost someone through death or through divorce or whatever it is, to allow yourself happiness in your own private way, and not just through your children and your children's children.
Yeah, and I would say that Sky Bergman, who's I'm not related to at all, we just happen to have very similar names, because Ciel actually means sky in French, but we're not related. I wish. I mean, she's a really wonderful woman. But she gave the best piece of advice for me in terms of relationships, which is that you can't change another person, not one iota. And I think when you're young, you feel like you can change your partner, and once you realize you can't do that, boy, does a relationship get a lot easier.
Yeah.
And when I was doing the film, I had just started my relationship with my partner, who we've now been together for 8 years. And I can't tell you how much that one bit of advice has forever altered the way that I will be in relationship, and why I think that this relationship is so successful, because I kind of like from early on realized, okay, this is it. You either accept it or you don't, but you can't change another person. And that goes for friends too, not just, significant others. I think that it's important to recognize that. So, yeah.
Does anyone, I'm sitting here talking away. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the film?
Mary, like she does, yeah.
You have to unmute yourself, Mary. Mary, you're on mute. We can't hear you. There you go.
I found it. I found the little button. It took a while. But I was wondering, your grandmother went to a sneak preview of the movie, and what was her reaction to seeing herself on screen?
Oh, well, she was a proud grandma for sure. And I think she loved seeing herself on the screen. I mean, I think she would, she was so funny. We did it in a massive theater. There were 850 people. She greeted every single person that came into that theater. I have never smiled so much. My cheeks were literally hurting. I mean, that was probably the happiest day of my life, was sharing that moment with my grandmother. And, when I was working on the project, she would ask me, so how's that project coming with the old people? And I'm like, Grandma, I never told her this, but in my mind, I would say, Grandma, you were the oldest of the old people, but she never saw herself that way. And it just was such a joy to share that moment with her. And we, it's unfortunate she passed away 6 weeks later, but what a gift that, we both were able to share that moment together. And there were 27 of the 40 people that I interviewed were there that night. So it was really, I knew the film wasn't finished at that point, but it was really, really important to me because time was of the essence. I really wanted to get it on the big screen so that I could share it with the people who were in the film and their families. And then I took another year and really reworked the whole film and re-edited it. But that was probably the best, that was absolutely the best night of my whole life, was sharing that moment with my grandmother. And I think my mom says that she thinks that my grandmother lived long enough to see the film on the big screen. And then she decided to stop eating and drinking. She passed away in 2 days, and 6 weeks after the film. I think she was 103 and a half. And I think she had just done what she needed to do, and that was what a gift she gave me and everyone else that was there that night, because it was just what a great night.
That's wonderful. What kind of feedback did you get from all the participants' families?
Well, I think the participants' families really, now I've had, when you do a film like this, you're going to have people pass away. I always give them all the footage that I shot, and I have transcripts of everything. And then they're so appreciative because they have a record of their family member. And I did a Q&A one time, like a panel with, I think there were 6 of the people that were in the film, and I were there when it came out into theaters. We did this really sweet panel. And I was thanking them so from the bottom of my heart for opening up their hearts to me and their stories, because I think the reason the film works is that they didn't hold back at all, and they shared stories that in some cases they had never shared with anyone else, like Emmy talking about her mother and being left on the train platform. That it was really very moving that they trusted me to tell their stories, because they all knew it was going to be on the big screen, although I don't know if they figured I would get that far. But no, she hadn't told that story to anyone until she, and that was a crazy moment when that story happened. But so I was thanking them for being so open and for allowing me to capture their stories. And Paul and Lucky Louie both chimed in and said, no, we should thank you because you made our lives relevant and you cared enough to collect our stories. And that was, I kind of hadn't thought about it in that way, that everyone wants to feel relevant. And the fact that I took the time to do that was a gift for them as well. Here I'm thinking, oh, you have given me this greatest gift of sharing your story with me. And they're saying, no, you've given us the greatest gift of wanting to collect our stories. And so it was really a beautiful symbiotic relationship, back and forth. But No, with Emmy, I interviewed her because I do the same yoga that she does. And I really wanted to interview somebody that was she's now 90 something, I think 91 or 92, but I wanted to interview somebody that also was still doing that yoga. I had no idea of that backstory. And when she said that, my jaw just dropped. And I was like, oh my God, this is taking a totally different direction. Anyway, I see Hazel has her hand raised. Hazel, what would you like to ask?
Well, I'm a person who was lucky to have parents and grandparents and great grandparents.
Wow.
And I felt that, and they lived in the earlier days. They all were in they're not now, but they were all in New Orleans, most in close neighborhoods. And I kind of felt that if you added up my experience, my mother's experience, my grandmother's experience, and my great grandmother's, just in years, and you told someone, I have this much experience. Say if you were going to go look for a job and you had, 450 years of experience, because that's who you were exposed to, and you got to hear their comments and their ideas, which were often very different from your parents' ideas. The grandparents didn't necessarily agree with the parents. Yeah. And often the grandparent is the one who stands up for the child in a lot of cases where they need that. Anyway, I was thinking about these years of experience and just wondering, how can we move towards doing that for kids today who don't live anywhere near their grandparents, never met their great grandparents, and what could we do to kind of share this experience, give them that kind of experience? An example is I have an iron pot, and it was around my mother's house, and she didn't use it, but she had it there. And then when she died, I got this iron pot, and it turns out that iron pot was made by one of my great uncles who had come to this country, and they used it for roasting coffee. Mm-hmm. When they were doing their laundry on Monday, they had a charcoal fire in the yard, and they boiled the laundry, but they had this iron pot, and they put the coffee beans in it. And while they're doing the laundry, they stirred the beans, and they got the beans from the wharf where my grandfather worked. Anyway, all of this went into this pot, and they had actually made the pot in this foundry that was in uptown New Orleans. And I just think about that story. Somehow it just sort of ties things together. And yet a lot of these kids, the only thing they know is what they just saw on their phone. And 10 minutes from now, it's going to be something different on the phone. It's not going to be the same. And this can't really take the place of that kind of, family tradition or common sense, or I don't know other words I want to give it, but what can we do for these kids? I don't know that if my grandson was just looking through his phone, if he would watch your movie, but he might watch some short segment of it.
Well, the film is going to be on PBS, and they are going to have a learning module as part of that. And so one of the things that I've become really passionate about is creating intergenerational connections and using the film as a catalyst. So trying to put it into educational institutions, or even an organization like this, like a JCC could take something like this on and do. We've done programs called Mavens and Mentions, where you pair an elder and a student together, and they work together over a semester or a quarter, and they get to learn about each other and hear those stories like what you're talking about. And it becomes part of an educational project where the students are, I don't want to say forced to, but I guess they're encouraged to participate in something like this, because sometimes they don't know what's good for them until they are in it. And the feedback that I've gotten from all these intergenerational projects that I've done because I've done a number through the university where I'm teaching, is that, you know, a lot of the students, like you mentioned, don't have elders in their lives. And I think that one of the things that's really important is connecting them to elders, and they realize how much more they have in common rather than the differences. The big difference really is age, but there's far more commonalities, and there's so much that they can learn because, like you said, a lot of times your parents don't have the same kind of time to deal with you in the same kind of way. And you have a grandparent or a pseudo grandparent. I mean, I feel like I have 40 new grandparents from working on this film. And when you have that, you can ask for advice in a different kind of way. And you can maybe share stories that you wouldn't feel as comfortable sharing with your parents. So there are organizations that are actually already doing that are online. If you wanted to be part of something like that, there's a number of different organizations that you can sign up and be a participant. I know there's something called Big and Mini and Eldera, and there's another one, Generations United. So there's a lot of different programs that are already in place. Mm-hmm. But like I said, one of the things that we're doing is creating this educational component that will hopefully get out to the age group that you're talking about, to high schools and colleges in a very big way when the PBS broadcast hits.
You know, my kids had to do a project in middle school. My son just did it this past year. He's in 7th grade, so I guess my daughter did also, where they have to interview a grandparent. And I think it is about a specific time in their life where something that was, I forgot what the question was, but it was a pretty extensive interview. And it was a wonderful experience for my son. I mean, my daughter, I should remember more, but unfortunately 2 years, I don't remember as much with her, but since my son just went through it, but it was so meaningful to him to learn so much about his grandfather. And his grandfather talked about his experience growing up in segregated Baltimore back in the, I guess in the 40s and 50s, and what that was like, and how you know, Baltimore was a little different. It's kind of on the cusp there, where it's located. But he discussed going to a magnet school that anyone could go to. So, you know, he came from this very Jewish neighborhood, but went to this magnet school, and there were African American kids. You know, there were maybe just one, I think, but it was just this wonderful opportunity for my father-in-law to get to learn about that culture and to finally befriend kids who weren't in his Jewish community, you know, and Irish kids and Italian kids, and they all came together, and what that was like. And, you know, for kids today, it's such a different experience. But that was this wonderful opportunity to open the conversation. And I think that it should start young. Mm-hmm. And move up to a more progressive, and it would be so wonderful if it was a continuous program in the school where they started to ask more in-depth questions, like to start off on this broad spectrum of, tell me about your life when you were my age, or some event in your life that was very meaningful and why it changed you, and then to progress on to, like, where are we different and where do we have similarities, and to just continue that educational system through the years of school would be so wonderful.
Well, that's my mission now, so we'll see how that goes.
If you need a partner in New Orleans, I'm happy to partner with.
Okay. I will hold you to that.
All right. I love this. This is a passion of mine also, because there's lost opportunities, but there's also, you know, opportunities to, like with Hazel's pot, to pass on those stories. My son is getting bar mitzvah next weekend, and something that we include in all of the grandchildren's rituals. My great-grandfather rather, came to America from Poland and was a very religious man, very, very religious man. And my mother still has his prayer shawl, his talis. And so for all the grandchildren, we incorporate that talis into their bar mitzvah. You know, they stand under it to receive their talis, but it's an opportunity for them to hear about this great-grandparent. Mm-hmm. Which I think is just lovely. If people could incorporate those little artifacts that seem insignificant but are very significant to that relative and to your family's history. I think it's wonderful for parents to understand the importance of explaining those artifacts that the family holds on to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
I hope Lucky Louie's family holds on to his big pot that he made the.
Oh, they will, because I think his son-in-law is still going to be making the mozzarellas for the deli. He took over that last week, so I think that will be a tradition that continues. So, yeah, great.
Anyone else have any comments or questions?
Well, I will send Rachel a link. I have 2 short videos that you guys can take a look at. One is Susie Edo-Bauman, who was the Japanese American woman. Her family usually gets together the week between Christmas and New Year's and makes mochi. And one of the things that I love about that is that passing of storytelling and ritual through food. And so that'll probably be my next feature-length film, is looking at what different cultures do and through food to pass on information and knowledge and wisdom, because that's certainly what I did with my grandmother. That's how I even got started in doing videos, was videoing her cooking. So, and the other one is called Forever Voters, which is about the League of Women Voters going into high schools and trying to educate students about why their voice matters, and trying to get them to register or pre-register to vote. And then hearing from the students about the things that they are really engaged with and involved in, and why they want to make a change as well. So I'll send an email, a wrap email, so you can send that out to everyone.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Well, this was so much fun. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you so much. Yes. And please, I'll include my email in that email as well. So please feel free to reach out. And thank you so much for making this happen. And I'm looking forward to connecting with your sister.
I know. I'll send you her email today.
Absolutely. All right.
Take care,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.